holding on Daf Yud, page 10, Amud Base 10b. And the Gemara that we learned before was basically this discussing the purpose of why you're putting this covering on the sukkah could make a difference if the sukkah is kosher or puzzle, at least according to the way Rashi understands it, that if you're putting the covering as a sheet on top of your sukkah because of shade, then it's a problem. If you're putting it to beautify the sukkah, then it's l'na'isa, it's to beautify the sukkah. It's fine. Taisus asks a funny question. He says, to beautify, how could you have if you put the schach, he says, for to stop the leaves from falling into your food, like the pine needles, that's the greatest noid, that's the greatest beautification you could do. To not have the pine needles from the evergreen needles falling into your food and then falling into the sukkah and on your table. So how could you? That's the most beautiful thing. How could the Mishnah say that it's not good according to you, Rashi? In other words, the way Rashi is understanding it is, if you're beautifying the sukkah, then it's fine. It's kosher to put up some type of sheet, either on top of the sukkah or under the schach. You're putting up a sheet there. It's fine. You're beautifying the sukkah. But if you're doing it for your own benefit, to make shade, to stop the leaves from falling, the foliage, other things that are debris from falling from the branches, that would be that, according to Rashi, that would be a problem. Those that put it for that purpose is a problem. But to beautify the sukkah, not around. He says, what do you mean beautifying the sukkah? He says, not having the leaves fall in the sukkah is beautification of the sukkah. So the way Rashi obviously learns, how does Rashi answer this question? So Rashi obviously learns that there's a difference when you put on decorations for your sukkah. That is to beautify the sukkah. When you're blocking the leaves from falling, it's really for your benefit. It's really for you. So, in other words, if you're doing something for that's called Seirech HaSukkah, that's beautifying the sukkah, then it would be considered batel to the schach, to the sukkah, and it's not considered an entity of its own that would interfere with your sitting, dwelling in the sukkah, because it would be like a separation, or like another roof, or have be like you're in a tent. But if it's batel to the sukkah, if it's nullified to the sukkah for the Seirech HaSukkah, then it's not a problem. If you're doing it for your own benefit, like because of the leaves or because of the sun, then that would be considered a entity of its own, and therefore, if it's not kosher schach, it's a problem. That's the way Rashi learns. Now, Tosfos argues on this, and Tosfos says that you have to translate it differently, because he can't fathom that there would be a difference between the purpose. If it's pasal schach, then if that's a problem, then it should be a problem in all cases. And if you have a kosher sukkah without it, so why should it be a problem? Your schach is kosher, so you have some extra non-kosher schach there. That shouldn't ruin your sukkah. As we see, that you could have things that are beautifying your sukkah, it doesn't ruin it. Why should this ruin your sukkah? You're allowed to beautify your sukkah with other entities, so why should this sheet ruin your sukkah if your schach is solid on its own? And Tosfos seems to follow this view in previous Gemaras as well. And the problem with having non-kosher schach is when you need to use it to kosher your sukkah, because your sukkah doesn't have enough schach. If your sukkah doesn't have enough schach, and you need to use this for kosher schach, and it's not kosher schach, that's when it becomes a problem. Because you're using it for your stuff. And he brings a similar interpretation from Rabbeinu Tam, that when it says in the Mishnah, you're spreading out the sheet because of the sun, what it means is you're spreading out the sheet so that the sun doesn't minimize your schach to make it less than the measured amount. And you're putting it under the schach to catch the leaves, because if the leaves fall, you're going to lose your majority shade that was accomplished through the leaves of the schach. And now if the leaves fall to the ground, you're not going to have the amount of schach that's needed. You won't have sufficient schach to make it majority shade. And so your sheet, that's the way Rabbeinu Tam is learning. So the sheet is sort of holding up your schach. That's the understanding. Now, Tosfos didn't exactly learn that way. Tosfos's understanding was very similar to that, but the point of Tosfos is that you are using the sheet in order to accomplish, in order to give your schach enough shade, in order to make your schach thick enough. You're benefiting from the sadin, from the sheet, and that would be why you're putting it up. So anyway, that's the machlekes Rashi and Tosfos over here, and all the commentaries, and the Gemara that makes a difference about lena oisa for noi. That's going to be a big difference between these. That's going to be, at least according to Rashi, that is an area where you have to differentiate between, if you're putting the schach up for the depends on the purpose of why you're putting the schach up, and so it's not so much for what you're putting, or it's more for what the reason is. It's not. In other words, it's you have enough schach, but if your reason is a wrong reason to put it up, then it's a problem. That's the way Rashi's learning it in Gemara. Now, so Rav Chizda, we had in the Gemara that Rav Chizda said that it's the problem is you're catching the leaves, but if you're doing it for l'na'isa, to beautify it, it's kosher. And the Gemara explains that might have just been in the Mishnah. It said mipnei hanashar, because of the falling leaves. But the Gemara says that you might have thought that that's just an example. So the Gemara clarifies, and Rav Chizda clarifies that, and he says that it's means it, or that's the reason, and it's not just an example or a common way people would put a sheet there, but it's actually only if it's done for that reason. If you did it for the purpose of l'na'isa, to beautify it, that would not be a problem. The Gemara tried to bring a raya from a brisa Tosefta about using all these different beautifications of your sukkah, and it said that it's that you could. And obviously, if you could use them for your sukkah, you have a problem of eating them on sukkahs, but you could use them for your sukkah. So you see from there that it's not a problem that they could be hanging from your sukkah. So the Gemara says that sounds like it's a proof. It sounds like it's a proof, and the Gemara says that it's not really a proof, because it could be that you were hanging them from the side, and it doesn't ruin your sukkah when you hang them from the side. And it was only talking about really the law of benefiting from them, which could be a problem on sukkahs, to benefit from these things that are hanging because they are muktzah and they're set aside. So that was the Gemara. I did want to mention that one of the commentaries says, why do we have so many examples of these beautifications of the sukkah? Let us just say you're putting up some beautiful, gives goyzim, shkedim, afariskim, remoinim, parkili adnovim, atarish al shiboilin, shmayenoi, shmanim, slotois. He's giving a lot of examples. So one of the commentaries mentions, he says, what's the whole concept of sukkah? A sukkah it's all about the remembering the clouds of glory. Now, so our holiday of Sukkot commemorates the Ananei HaKavod, which we spoke about in this week's Parsha. Actually, this past week's Parsha, we had Aaron HaKohen passed away, and there were Nistalka, the Ananim, Anani Akavod, left. Now, why don't we make a holiday about the Mun and a holiday about the Be'er Shel Miriam? Why do we only have a holiday commemorating the Anani Kavod? So commentary says, well, he says because the Be'er Shel Miriam, water, and the Mun, they needed out of necessity. There was no way they could have lived without bread and water. But the Anani Kavod, the clouds of glory, they are extras. And the extras is what we're commemorating. We're commemorating the Anani Kavod. He says, could be that's why it mentions over here all the different examples, because Sukkot, the whole concept of Sukkot is all about beautification. It's all about Hashem's extras, making things beautiful. And therefore, there's the Gemara gives, possibly, maybe that's why the Gemara gives, or the Bryce, I should say, the Tosefta gives all these different examples, emphasizing how the holiday of Sukkot has a lot to do with beautification. Now, I will also mention that it's interesting in Chabad, they don't, for some reason, there's a custom not to beautify the Sukkah. I'm not exactly sure the understanding, the full reason behind it, but has something to do with the essence of the mitzvah. We beautify the essence of the mitzvah, but not necessarily the Sukkah. But amongst the Welt in general and other customs, it's beautiful that they beautify the Sukkah, and in many ways, and it definitely is connected to this idea that the Sukkot is all about the Anani Kavod. I would also mention that there's a sikha from the Rebbe that seems to follow the same way of logic, where he says, why is it that some places in the Midrashim you find it mentions the Ananim, in some places it mentions the Anani Kavod. And so the Rebbe says, and based on other questions as well, the Rebbe says that there really were two distinct types of clouds. There was the Ananim, regular clouds that were protecting the Yidden for things that they needed, like, for example, from snakes and scorpions. There was a cloud that was protecting them from these snakes and scorpions. There was a cloud that was protecting them from being shot at by enemies, by the enemy, whatever they used to use, rocks and
arrows.
Arrows. Thank you. So this cloud would protect them from all those arrows and slingshots and other things, and rocks. And so those were necessities. Those are called ananim. When Aaron HaKohen passed away, so the Anani Kavod, at least according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, according to the simple understanding of the Chumash, the Anani Kavod, the clouds, the extras, the clouds which were like washing the clothing, that wasn't necessary. We had Be'er Shel Miriam, we had water. We could have washed our own clothing. But Hashem made a miracle that our clothing was washed. It was more of a Anani Kavod, or just the concept of having clouds that were the clouds that were bringing us honor. Those were extras. That was an extra thing. Those were not necessities. That type of cloud is that's the Anani Kavod. That was what left when Aaron passed away. Based on that, there's room to say, at least in Pshutei Shel Mikra, according to the simple understanding of the Chumash. Of course, the deeper understanding is that the clouds of Kavod came back when in the merit of Moshe. But in the simple understanding of the Chumash, at least in the way Rashi learns, it's possible to understand that maybe they didn't have the clouds of glory come back. And the reason is because everything that came back in the merit of Moshe, came back because they needed it. Moshe was the Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd. He provided them with all their needs. So they had man, even after, they had the Be'er Shel Miriam, even after Miriam died, they needed it. So he's the faithful shepherd. He's going to provide them with everything they need. But the Anani Kavod, they didn't necessarily need. So that wasn't something that necessarily that Moshe was gonna come back. And that's why we don't find Rashi emphasizing it. They emphasize that the Be'er Shel Miriam, we see in the Chumash that the Be'er Shel Miriam came back because that's how they had the well, even after Miriam died. But you don't see that the Anani Kavod, you don't see clearly in the Chumash that the Anani Kavod that they still had. And therefore, there's room to say that the Anani Kavod left when Aaron, and that's why it also says that the Canaanim they saw that they were given permit. They heard that the Anani Kavod left. They understood that they have permission, nitna reshus. They have permission to fight the Yidden. What type of permission did they have to fight the Yidden? They could fight them. There's no cloud. No, the clouds of protection were still there. The clouds of glory was what left. And therefore, since Hashem wasn't giving them clouds of glory, the Canaanim thought that now it's an opportune time, maybe. It's maybe we have permission to fight the Yidden. Not that we can fight them. We don't know if we'll be able to, because they still have the regular clouds. But the clouds of glory left. That's why they thought the Rishus, maybe that they have permission. But the Rebbe adds one point, and that is the famous question: how many clouds of glory, how many Anani Kavod were there? So there were really seven Anani Kavod. Why? Because 4 directions, up and down, that's 6. And then you have the one that went in front of them to flatten the road, so on, prepare the way. So there were 7. So the famous question is, so why do we have, if the Sukkah is supposed to be commemorating the Anani Kavod, why are we fulfilling the mitzvah with 2.5 walls if we should need 7 walls, or at least 6 walls, or at least 4 walls and 2 and a ceiling, a roof, a schach, and a floor? Why are we getting away with 2.5? It's a famous question on the whole concept of Sukkah, if it's based on Anani Kavod. So the way the Rebbe explains it, it actually answers the question. That they had Ananim, they had 7, but they weren't all Anani Kavod. Anani Kavod is what the holiday is commemorating. The holiday is commemorating the clouds of glory. The clouds of glory, that was just certain ones were considered, just the fact that we're being protected by Hashem in a way that was not necessary. That's the clouds of glory. The other were called clouds. They weren't called clouds of glory. And so even though we had extra clouds on, we had these clouds protecting us and giving us, washing our clothes and all the all the things that they were doing, but certain ones we're not commemorating the holiday of Sukkot. We're only commemorating the Anani Kavod, and that, and because of that, it's not about the number of clouds. It's about the fact that Hashem was protecting us in a way that was miraculous, that we didn't necessarily need just out of glory. So we commemorate that with the celebration of Sukkot, with also a sukkah that is gives us that memory. So that's a little insight. Yes, Jeffrey.
All this is very interesting, but it's not explicit in the Torah. And there is another Inyan of Sukkot that is explicit in the Torah, and I think that explains some of the decorations, especially the kinds that were enumerated in the last page or so that we were reading. It's Chag HaAsif. We're so happy to be in the land and to be able to farm the land and to produce all the beautiful fruits that come from the land. So therefore, we are celebrating that success of the prior year. And it seems to me that that's much more explicit because it's called Chag HaAsif. And it tells you that when you bring in all the food and it's not in the field anymore, that's when you celebrate. That's when you have time to be with your family, to have friends come to share the korbanot and things like that. So it seems to me that it's very interesting. And we say that the fruits and the drinks and things that you hang in the sukkah, you don't use during sukkahs. But if you're hanging sheets underneath, there's another problem. That is that those things are kabalei tuma, because those are regular kelim, as opposed to hanging a bunch of grapes or in a bag or something like that. And no one seems to be referring to that other aspect of sukkahs in this particular section. So, you could cover it over when it's raining. You're not going to sit in the sukkah. But then you have to take that cover off. And those covers are typically kelim. So they're makabel tuma.
So if you look in the Gemara, so 2 things. First of all, what you said at first, very nice. I think it's a beautiful point. And I think it goes hand in hand with what we were explaining, and it's a beautiful addition, because why are we making such a big deal out of the decorations? Of course, it's because we're commemorating the clouds of glory. And how are we commemorating it at this time of the year when it's a great, when all of these produce, we have what to thank Hashem for as well, in His great kindness, continuous kindness, as He's shown us and continues to show us even now with our. So I think it really goes hand in hand. I think that's very nice, beautiful insight, Jeff. Now, by the way, you said about the other your question about the Gemara that it doesn't need to be emphasizing the fact that these things are makabel tumah and comparable to things that are that are beautiful, that are branches, and those things are kosher for schach. So the thing is that the Gemara had said that if you put the sheet linna oisa for beauty, even though it's makabel tuma, it's actually going to be kosher for schach. So it's not a problem, according to the way Rashi's learning, the fact that it's makabel tuma if it's batal. If it's nullified to the sukkah because it's beautifying it, then it wouldn't be a problem. Now the truth of the matter is, if you look in the Tosefta, it also talks about krumim, which are basically clothing. So it's continuation of this idea. And sadinim, it also mentions the sadinim, and so it does mention these things that are makabel tuma, that are makabel tuma, and so it's not, these are not only examples of branches or fruits or other items, but they are really things that are it's along the same line. So we're really talking about things that are makabel tuma, and yet they're not going to be ruining your schach, at least the way the Gemara understood it initially. Okay, so anyway, the bottom line is that we
Rabbi,
have, yes, David.
This explanation from the Rebbe,
Yeah.
do you remember the source where it was, so I can look at it outside?
Sure. Chapter, it's book 18, Chai of Likutei Sichos, and it was this past week's parsha in Chukas.
Okay, thanks.
The third sicha.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful sicha. Okay, so it's so the Gemara then mentioned that, turn the page, and we mentioned that the noi of the sukkah, is it memayet the sukkah or not? Does it minimize the sukkah, the size of the sukkah, the decorations of the sukkah? Do they minimize the sukkah? Okay, so let's start over there. Oh, 1 second. We went further, actually. I'm sorry. So we said that the noise sukkah is not, let me just go over one more little piece. So the decorations of the sukkah is not memayet the sukkah from the height. It doesn't lessen the height of the sukkah, which is something that we were talking about earlier in the Masechta, about if a person's sukkah was too big and you wanted to lessen it, or you wanted to if you want to lessen the height so it's not considered above 20 amos, or what happens if your sukkah is just the minimum height and you add these noi to the sukkah? Does it minimize your sukkah? And the din was that it doesn't minimize your sukkah. You could actually have a minimum size sukkah, 10 handbreadths high, and then you put these decorations in. The fact is, practically speaking, physically speaking, it is minimizing your height, but it's a kosher sukkah. It doesn't minimize the halachic ruling of your sukkah. Now, of course, Tosfos is bothered with that, because if your schach goes down a little, that does minimize the height of your sukkah. But the decorations, they are not considered to minimize the height of your sukkah. And Tosfos says, because when your schach goes down, your dira, your dwelling, is called a dira srucha, a distasteful dwelling. It's too small. It's like a disgusting dwelling. But here that you're beautifying it with decorations, that it no longer falls into a dira shrucha. In other words, we don't look at the decorations as if they're minimizing the height of your sukkah, but instead we look at them as like adding decoration, and your height that doesn't make your sukkah smaller. It's an interesting differentiation between these two cases, because logically you would think, well, the fact is your sukkah is still serucha, it's small, but somehow we look at the fact that it's decorations and we say, nope, it's not called a stira serucha anymore. What do you mean? I can't fit in it. It's hard to fit in.
One is an essential part of your sukkah. The schach is an important part of the construction. Noi is not. Noi is just there. So if it does something positive and it's not something negative, it's one thing. But when you have the schach being lower than the components of your sukkah, it's as if your walls were smaller, or that's all there is walls and schach. But I would say that's why.
Yeah, but the thing is, think about it. If we're calling it a dira srucha because of the schach going down, and so you have very little space to move around, you can hardly stand up. You're walking around bent over, and it's called the dira srucha. So the decorations are also causing you to be bent over and sitting in this dira srucha. In other words, you can't get out of the fact that it is limiting your ability to stand. And that if that's called a dira srucha, there definitely sounds like there could be room to say that this is, in fact, that was Tyson's question. This is like a dira srucha. He says, no, if it's decorations.
I would say no, because the decorations don't count for anything.
I know, but logically, physically, you can't fit in. How do you fit in?
You push it aside and you sit in. But what you're pushing aside is not the essential part of the sukkah.
But if you have to push it aside, isn't that called the
what?
If you have to push it aside, that's to me called the serucha.
I have to push my mother-in-law aside also, but that doesn't passel my sukkah.
Well, so, I don't know. Dira serucha. Anyway, there's definitely room to. It's an interesting insight, but obviously, what you're saying, Isaac, is correct. That Taisa says there is a difference, and you have, it's so you have to understand it that this is like a pleasure. It's almost like if there's room in the heart, if you have room, this is like it's enjoyable. It's because it's enjoyable, it's beautiful. Therefore. It doesn't cause the sukkah to be called a dira srucha, because it's pleasuresome. Seems something along those lines. It's noi, it's beauty, and you wouldn't call it a dira srucha. It's called the noi. It's for beauty. It seems like there's because of the enjoyment that you're getting from it, you wouldn't call it anymore. You wouldn't use it against itself. You wouldn't use it to ruin itself. It wouldn't have a negative effect.
Well, it's the same as my sugar. No.
So okay. So anyway, so that's the noi. Now then came the Gemara that mentioned that Rav Ashi said from the side, however, you have these decorations on the side, they will minimize the size of your sukkah and cause it to be puzzle. And I guess when it comes to height, it's about dira srucha. It's not about practical fitting. That it's more about discomfort. When it comes to the side, it's physically you can't fit. You simply can't. And so for the side, it actually will minimize your size of your sukkah that you simply won't be able. I mean, 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths is a very minimal sukkah. and it's simply enough to fit your body in and your table. And so in a small little table. So if you don't have that, then you won't be able to fit. So it will minimize your sukkah from the side. It will lessen. It'll dis-kosher. It'll cause your sukkah to be non-kosher. It'll invalidate your sukkah. Okay. Oh, actually, I did want to mention to you, Jeffrey, that the fruits are makabel tumah. So
Yeah.
fruits would also be a problem for schach as well. Just so in other words, all the items there actually are basically problem for schach. The branches are what we use for schach. The fruits themselves would be makabel tumah. You wouldn't be able to use the fruits for schach. Okay, now the Gemara then mentioned the story. The story is Minyamin. It's an interesting name. It sounds like Binyamin, but it's with a mem. Minyamin, he was a servant of Rav Ashi, and he put his shirt that was sopping wet. He put it on top of the sukkah to dry.
He hung his laundry.
And Rav Ashi said, you gotta lift it up. So people won't say that you're allowed to be makabel mesachek with davar makabel tumah, something that's makabel tumah, something that can receive tumah. It's a complete object. A shirt, a garment is considered something that's a completed vessel that could be that if someone touches it, if something impure touches it, it becomes impure. It's davar makabel tumah. So don't put it there because people are going to think that it's okay to use for schach. So the Gemara says. So he asked him back. He says, "What do you mean? Everyone sees that it's wet, so they know we're not using it for schach. We're doing it to dry it off. People realize it just rained and it got wet and I'm hanging it." So the Gemara answers, "Yeah." The Rav Ashi told him back. He says, when it dries, don't keep it up there, because once it's dried, people will see it and they're gonna think that maybe you're allowed to use something that's makabel tumah for schach. So number one of the questions on this Gemara is the fact that how are you allowed to benefit from putting this as schach on top of the schach? We learned before you're not allowed to benefit from the schach of the sukkah and the walls of the sukkah. They're kodesh. So how are you allowed to do this? How is he allowed to hang it on top of the sukkah of the schach? So one of the understandings is that this is not the derech of getting benefit. In other words, normal benefit from the schach is not hanging something to dry on. The benefit that you could have from the schach would be other types of benefit, but not using it for to hang things on it. And therefore, if you were to put it on it, it's not the derech, and as it is, it's only a derabanan. So it would be considered permissible to hang it on it. It's only an issue of since it's not the derech, so it would be permissible maybe to hang it on the schach, and the only issue is that people might think that you're allowed to use it for kosher schach, and that would be a problem. That's one of the answers given. The Gemara continues and mentions that noye sukkah, that's muflag from the sukkah, from the schach. Okay, so let's start there. Itmar.
Yes,
Itmar is the
Noi,
first word on the line. It's about 9 lines down from the top of the page. 10b. We're on page 10b, 9 lines down from the top of the page. Itmar. It was said in the base medrash, and it was generally this is Itmar is the Amoraim, the authors of the Talmud of the Gemara. So it was said in the base medrash that Noye Sukkah, the beautifications of the Sukkah, when they spread things out under the schach, hamuflagin mimena, but it's muflag, it's far from the schach, from the roof, from the kosher roof. So if it's muflagin mimena arba, if it's 4 handbreadths away from the schach, Rav Nachman Amar Kshera, Rav Nachman says that it's kosher.
he means below. If he's saying away from, does that mean below?
It means below, yeah. So correct. So it's considered kosher, even if it's 4 handbreadths away. Put it there for beauty. So it's not for schach, it's for beauty. It's kosher. Rav Chizda Rabba Bar Funa Amri, but Rav Chizda Rabba Funa say, Sula, it is invalid. It invalidates the sukkah, and it's no longer called a noi sukkah, but rather this is considered like a oyel, like a tent. It creates a tent, and the person sleeps under it. He's sleeping inside a tent, and of course, we're dealing with things that are puzzle for schach. It would be like a separation between the person and the schach, and person's not considered to be sitting in the sukkah. The other Talmud, okay, go Talmud. Talmud, okay. So the Noi Sukkah is according to the other opinion, the opinion of Rav Nachman, it's kosher. How is it kosher? Aren't you sitting and dwelling in a tent? The answer is no. According to Rav Nachman, it's batel. It's considered nullified. But according to Rav Chizda and Rabba Bar Huna, they could say it's 4 tvachim away. It's no longer batel, nullified to the schach, but rather it is considered a tent in its own right. A person who sleeps under it will be considered sleeping inside a tent and not considered sleeping in the sukkah. I always wondered the concept of putting the decorations in the sukkah. I wonder if people go overboard and if it does create halachic problems, as we see here, that it could be an issue if it's more than 4 handbreadths down. This could be a problem, and definitely a problem. Depends on definitely a problem if it's wide. If it's wide to the measurement, that would invalidate a person sitting under it. But even if not, it seems that the Mishnah Berurah brings like a chumrah not to that you shouldn't have it lower than 4 tefachim. You shouldn't have it lower than a certain than the 4 tefachim, because even though it's not wide, but I think we're nervous that you might have other decorations and all that. It could be they'll attach. They'll be considered you'll end up having a tent inside your sukkah, meaning having other items there that will other decorations that together will be considered that they're schach puzzle. It'll be in kosher schach that will invalidate your sukkah. So even if it's okay the way it is because it doesn't have the right measurement, width and length, but if it's more than 4 tefachim away, a person should be machmir not to put such a schach, such a decoration up. So it sort of limits the decorations. I'm not so familiar with decorations in the sukkah, but I guess some of you probably are more familiar with it. Are people very careful to put it within 4 tefachim? Is that the common minhag? Anyone familiar with that? Putting decorations up, that they make sure it's very close to the schach. That the common is it like a known? Is that a known halacha? Anyway, here we see that it's a machlokes. And
That was Rabbi, that was the reason why I asked you about the, suppose that you have netting that you're hanging from and you're using the netting to hang stuff from.
right.
I do use it, and it's within a tefach of the schach.
But how far down does the decorations fall? That's the question.
The decorations, I don't know, it's attached at the end of a string or attached at the end of something that hooks onto the netting, and it runs about, let's say about 3 to 4 well, no, about 2, no more than 2 handbreadths. That's how far
It
down.
depends how tall your schach is. You don't want people to bop their heads.
Yeah.
I used to hang, I don't go anymore. I used to hang puzzle esrogim from my schach. I listened to Cheshin of a Rebbe. I used to go into his sukkah and you could just breathe it. He used to hang esrogim and little jars of honey. And I know the esrogim I do. But even there, you don't want to bop somebody on the head. So you put it up high enough that people can walk through it.
Right. But here we're learning something else, that even if you have a nice high sukkah, that and I believe it's brought in Shulchan Aruch that the measurement, the limit is 4 tefachim, 4 hand. Even though our Gemara gives a machlokes, but I believe the halacha follows Rav Chizda and Rabbi Bar Rav that say it's puzzle, and so that you would be limited to 4 handbreadths from the schach, from the kosher schach.
So that 4 tefachim is 3 feet.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, no.
A little less, 2.5.
No,
tefach is about 3 inches, according to Rav Chaim. It depends how long your hadassim and aravis are. So the size of your hadassim and aravis, that's how
far down your schach goes. You got a good
the lulav. Actually, the lulav is 4 tefachim. The lulav from the shedra to the end of the shedra is 4 tefachim, right? So that's how a little longer than the hadassim and aravis. Hadassim and aravis are 3 tefachim.
16 inches from the schach. That's
I would say even less, because that shita that holds 16 inches is not the commonly accepted shita. That's the chazanish. And if you don't use a 6-ounce cup for kiddush, then you can't really follow his. And if you don't use the extra long hadassim and aravis for your lulav, then you can't use his measurement for the schach. He's not the commonly accepted view. The commonly accepted view in the world is the other view that is closer to 3 inches of tefach. That's the more accepted view. So therefore, it would be closer to 12 inches from the roof, which does limit your. Now the leniency is that even if it's longer, it could still be kosher, because if it's not wide enough to passel, so there still are leniencies that schach passel only passels the sukkah. When you have invalid schach, it only ruins your sukkah if it has the measurement of the width and length for 4 tefachim. So you would get away with it. But I believe the Brewer's Machmer, I see they quote a Mishnah Brewer here that there is room to be.
That's a little over a foot.
Quote a Ramah, yeah. That you should. The Ramah says that you should tie the noi sukkah. Don't tie it more than 4 tefachim away. And the Mishnah Berurah writes that even though mitzad hadin, it would be permitted if it doesn't have the width of 4 handbreadths. Nevertheless, the Ramah is machmir because we're afraid you'll have a lot of it, and you'll end up sitting under it, and it'll have a width of 4 tefachim. So basically, it's not necessarily a problem, but it could be a problem, and the Ramah seems to be machmir that says you shouldn't, you should make sure not to do it. So I guess it's important to know this halacha. People who are putting a lot of decorations, that it's ideal to put it within 4 tefachim of the schach.
Yeah, you're not hanging anything a foot long by 4 feet down. I mean, 4 inches, a foot down and a foot long.
No. The Ramah is saying don't even if it's small, you really shouldn't hang anything more than a foot.
Right.
That's what the Ramah is saying. It doesn't matter how
Right.
the width and length, but of course halachically it will make a difference. But according to the chumrah that the Ramah says, we should try not to put anything, foot down. Okay, so the Gemara continues and mentions over here that Rav Chizda Rabba bar Rav Huna, Rav Chizda and Rabba bar Rav Huna iklu lebei reish galusa. They happened to reach they reached the house of the head of the reish galusa, the exilarch. And why did they go to him? So they went to him because the Rav Nachman, they wanted to honor him by visiting him. So the Gemara says, in fact, Rashi brings down that who are they going to see? Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was the Mamuna, was the person in charge. He was an Av Bezdin. He was Mitzava Beves Reish Goyla. He was in charge over there in the exilarch's house. So Agninhu Rav Nachman put them to sleep. In other words, gave them the place to sleep. The sukkah, in a sukkah shenoyeha muflagin mimena. The sukkah that its decorations were far from the schach arba tefachim, 4 handbreadths. So if you remember the Gemara before, we just had Rav Nachman held that it's no problem, and Rav Chizda and Rabba bar Rav Huna held that it is a problem to have 4 hands. So here they're all joining together on Sukkot, and Rav Nachman's in charge over there, and he's basically putting them in a sukkah that he holds is kosher, but they don't.
Shtiku.
Ishtiku, they didn't say anything. They didn't say anything. They were quiet. Amar lahu. So he said to them in the Hadar Behu Rabbanan Mishmatayu, have you retracted from your shita? Are you holding that it's kosher? Why? Like, how are you sleeping over here? So Amrulay, so they told him, Anan, Shluchei mitzvah, Anan, we are messengers doing a mitzvah, and because we're Shluchei mitzvah, Paturin min sukkah, we are exempt from the sukkah. It's a funny story. Now, why is it funny? Because Rav Nachman was sort of like getting them. He had the upper hand over here. He's got the sukkah. He's in charge, and he pushed them into following his shita. Now, the Ritva asks a famous question over here: how are you allowed to do such a thing? It's sort of like lifnei iver. You're causing someone else to transgress according to their their view. They hold that it's usher. Are you allowed to do this? To put someone in a situation where they hold that this is usher and sort of like force them to follow your shita.
Force them or offer them?
No,
Well, he
he
didn't say
didn't
anything.
offer them.
He didn't mention it. Didn't give them another option,
No,
and he didn't say what did he say, Ezra?
no, I'm saying he didn't offer anything. And if, in fact, if anything, it sounded more vindictive than anything else.
Vindictive?
Yeah, it says, did you retract, from your whatever it is? That to me is somewhat vindictive.
Oh, I thought he was asking them, is this okay for you?
That's not what he said. Sorry, that's not
Did
what he
you
said.
retract from your feeling that this is not kosher? If yes, you can sleep here.
No,
So
that's not the way
I
I
mean,
read it.
the simple understanding is that it was almost like in the morning he asked them this. Yeah,
Oh,
I think that's the understanding. Now it doesn't say it, but he's but that would seemingly be what they were quiet. They didn't say anything. And then he mentions to them this thing. But it could be that could be a shot that maybe it happened right afterwards. But in any event, from the Rishonim, we sort of see the Ritva asks this question. He says it's a Iver. Now, if he just asked them right afterwards, he says, "Oh, you didn't retract," so it's not really a strong question. You didn't retract. You can't ask a question Lefnei Iver. What do you mean? I didn't yet go to sleep. They didn't go to sleep yet. But I think the way they're understanding it is Agninhu, that he put them to sleep almost like they went to sleep. He put them to sleep. Agninhu means that they actually went to sleep. And maybe that's why the Rishonim understand that this was like in the morning. He says to them, "Oh, so did you retract?" Anyway, so the answer that the Ritva gives is that when it's visible that this is not according to your shita, that is not a problem. In other words, if I was giving you giving you a mitzvah to fulfill, and it's something that you can't tell, and I know it doesn't fit your shita, your rav, that would be a problem to give it to you to eat, because or to fulfill a mitzvah with, or because it doesn't fill, and you wouldn't know the difference. But if you could tell yourself, it's very obvious, as you see that the decorations are hanging 2 feet down, that's it's very obvious. You're banging into these decorations. You can easily,
and that's why what he said was not in a negative. He didn't have to say anymore. All he had to say was, "Did you change your shita?" Because he's pointing up or whatever, and I think it's perfectly appropriate. Ezra,
so the question
he's
is
not being vindictive. He wasn't being nasty.
no, but it is a little problematic. Why did he even do this in the first place?
Why did he do what?
Why did he put them there in the first place?
He's asking, "What's your shita?"
No,
No.
he put them to sleep there, and they were quiet. Now, if he was really nice to them, he says he could have asked them, "What's your shita?" Here, he knew their shita very clearly, and he doesn't offer them, "Would you like me to take down the decorations?" He doesn't offer such a thing. He says, "Or do you want to go to a different sukkah? Do you want to go to my neighbor? You want to go somewhere else?" So, instead, he sort of like forces them into this, and doesn't sound so interested in hearing any other sheep, like or the highway.
It's late at night. People want to go to sleep.
Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, their response kind of reminds that
The Eruv joke, what?
it reminds me of the Eruv joke.
Eruv joke?
What's the Arab joke?
Oh, the Eruv joke. The guy is learning with this chavrusa for many years.
Many.
Says, "I want to invite you to my son's bar mitzvah." So the guy
Oh,
tells
the wedding.
wedding. So he says,
He needs an aid for the wedding.
you know, I'm not Jewish. He says, what? I've been learning with you Torah, Gemara for years. You're not Jewish? How could you? How could it be? He says, yeah, I enjoy learning Gemara, but I'm not Jewish. He says, but what do you mean? You keep Shabbos. How could you do that? I see you keep Shabbos. He says, well, I don't exactly keep Shabbos. I always make sure to carry something on Shabbos. I'm not exactly keeping Shabbos. I carry something. He says, but what do you mean? We have an Erev in this city. So if you carry something, if you carry, then you're
still keeping Shabbos.
Still keeping Shabbos because we have an Erev. He says, that Erev? I don't hold of that Erev.
That's the joke.
That's the Erev joke, yeah.
That must be a rabbi's joke. That's
so anyway, so the this is how they answered him. Shluchei mitzvah. We don't need the sukkah in the first place. We're putter from the sukkah.
They had the right answer.
Now the question is there a heter to you rely on a shluchei mitzvah exemption? Being a shliach mitzvah, they're on a mission doing the makabel pnei rabbi. They're on a mission to do a mitzvah, and therefore they're exempt. But the thing is, even if you're exempt, are you exempt in any scenario? Like you don't have to try to go to a sukkah, or is this or should you try to find a kosher sukkah? And if you don't have any other options, then you're exempt. So, simply speaking, it sounds like shluchei mitzvah here maybe are completely exempt, unless you say that.
Shluchei? Is it shluchei mitzvah? Shluchei mitzvah enu nizakin. But what do you say when it's you don't have to do another mitzvah? Ha'isik b'mitzvah, no?
Osik b'mitzvah, patur mitzvah.
No, I hear the term shluchei mitzvah and it doesn't jive in my head with.
There are different pshatim over here, by the way. If he's what the mitzvah was, if it's kabel pnei rabbi or to pidyon shvuyim or lomad Torah, to hear the drasha of the Reish Galusa, the Exilarch's drasha, but they're doing some mitzvah. It's different perushim over here what they're going for, but they're calling themselves shluchei mitzvah, and we are Paturim min HaSukkah. It's basically a Mishnah later on that talks about Shluchei Mitzvah Paturim min HaSukkah. But so based on that Mishnah later on, the question is, well, is that a blanket exemption, or is that something that you're supposed to try to find a sukkah? Anyway, we're going to stop here, and maybe we'll talk about it more tomorrow. Sei gesund. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great day. Have a great week, everybody.